Hey everybody! In this video, we're going to talk about ethics and data science and social science. Now, why do we make this one of the first few lectures in this class? Well, if you've taken some social science classes before, you know that social science is unique in that we often have to make difficult decisions about what type of research is ethical. Ethical because our research can spill into all sorts of different dimensions of people's lives and disrupt human relationships and have all sorts of ethical or legal consequences. If, on the other hand, your background is in data science, it's probably not that you've never thought much about ethics. It's just that it's not regularly part of a course. And as I'll discuss more today, I think the reason we need to forefront our discussion of ethics is that we've seen what can go wrong when either social scientists or data scientists, or even social scientists and data scientists working together, don't think carefully enough about the ethical implications of their work. Now, why is this particularly important in the realm of computational social science or data science and social science? The answer, I think, is that we're doing such new and innovative work, and anytime you're at the kind of edge of science, there's always going to be difficult questions. We could be talking about genomics right now. We could be talking about AI right now. We could be talking about lots of other fields, and all of them would have difficult questions about the kind of broader consequences of our behavior for people or the environment or whatever. But what's unique about computational social science is that we're often collecting data, often large amounts of data, and there's a real gray area around whether we have obtained consent from people to look at that data, or maybe we're running massive field experiments and did people agree to be part of that experiment? These are the types of questions that arise when you use digital trace data. The types of data we'll be using throughout this course, things like data collected from social media sites, internet search engines, and so on. So what's the last reason to care about ethics, apart from all the other ones I just described, the consequences for people, for science, and the progress of science? It's really for everyone else. So let me give you an example. Back in 2012, some really talented data scientists at Facebook were interested in doing some large experiments on people on their platform. They wanted to probe some kind of psychological research that had gone on for a few decades. More specifically, they wanted to investigate the concept of emotional contagion. So you've probably all experienced emotional contagion, but you might not know that there was a fancy word to describe it. What is emotional contagion? It's when being exposed to the emotions of others induces people or causes them to be emotional themselves. So if you see lots of people who are very happy and you see them exchanging, say, facial expressions and a very high tone of voice or something like that, then you are more likely to assume those types of behaviors according to these decades of research in social psychology and psychology. And so what the Facebook researchers wanted to find out is that also true on social media? Now, when you think about it, being in the same room with someone matters for that type of stuff, right? You can there's some intangible things. Are people smiling? Are they gesticulating wildly, right? To convey their positive emotions or their negative emotions, right? What is it about being in the same room with someone versus, seeing someone asynchronously, maybe in your social media news feed, that changes whether or not we can become emotional as groups of people, or in a positive way or a negative way? And so they set out to do this in a somewhat unprecedented way. They did something only Facebook at the time could do. They took just under 700,000 people and put them in a large experiment. The experiment had 3 different conditions. What the researchers wanted to do was expose some people to fewer negative emotions and some people to fewer positive emotions, and see whether that had consequences about a new job and it's wonderful. They would, for this one group of people, remove that post from their timeline. And conversely, if there was a very negative post, they would remove some of those posts from the second group of people's timeline. Now they had control groups for each of these two groups. So in total, there were 4 groups of people in the study. And they ran the study over 2 weeks in 2012. And what they found is, sure enough, if you downweight some of the positive emotions, you see more negative emotions spreading across this group of people. And if you downweight the negative emotions, you see more positive emotions spreading, right? Now, the size of this effect was very small, but that's often the case in social science. Often, because of the complexities of real life, the effects we're able to observe are very small. But at the same time, it generated an enormous amount of criticism when the paper came out in a prestigious journal called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So why did it create so much controversy? Well, you might already have some ideas. The most important criticism, probably, or the most common criticism at least, was that the researchers had not obtained consent from the people in the research study to be part of a research study. Now, the response from Facebook was that legally they were allowed to do this because when people signed up for Facebook at the time, they agreed to the terms of service of Facebook. The terms of service is a long legalese document that specifies what Facebook is and is not allowed to do with the data that you generate on the platform. So when people signed up for Facebook, many of them, or perhaps even the vast majority of them, unwittingly signed up to be part of experiments. Okay, so there was this issue of whether people knew they were being studied. There was a second issue though. Suppose someone had been exposed to a very negative, suppose someone was in a very negative state of mind, was feeling depressed, and all of a sudden Facebook suddenly downweighted the amount of positive content in their feed. There were concerns that those types of people could become more depressed, that it could have negative mental health consequences, or even more broadly, that it could cause them to harm themselves. That's probably the most extreme concern that was voiced. So the experiment really became a lightning rod because no one had really decided or tried to do this type of research before. And it's really a warning call for the rest of us for a few different reasons. I should say, having met some of the researchers involved and read some of their responses after the incident, that the researchers were very well intentioned. They weren't trying to produce some kind of negative outcome in the world. They were trying to understand what the platform was doing to human psychology, and they thought there was an enormous value in that. Do they regret the way that they presented the study and that the study was interpreted? Of course. And one of the most common criticisms of the study is that it could have been worded in a more effective way. But nevertheless, overall, the story here is that these were relatively well-intentioned researchers who nevertheless found themselves embroiled in one of the biggest controversies to rock data science and social science between the years, say, 2010 and 2020. So as we think about ethics, we're going to do some reading this week. Matt Selganik's wonderful book, Bit by Bit. And in that book, he's going to outline a few different principles that I think are really worth you considering as you begin to explore the field of computational social science. The first is respect for persons. Is what we're doing respecting their autonomy, their right to consent to be part of an experiment? There are cases, one could argue, where we should be able to do research without people's consent. Now, these are probably few and far between, and they might have different risk-benefit calculuses than other types of studies. But it's something that is done both in social science and in non-social science fields. Second, there's this kind of question that I just alluded to: do the risks outweigh the benefits, right? And anytime we're doing this type of research, we need to ask that question. If the risks of the Facebook emotional contagion study were so grave that someone could have hurt themselves, that's an amazing risk that you're asking people to assume, particularly people who didn't consent probably into being studied, right? And then if we ask about the benefit, well, we already kind of knew that emotional contagion happened. We did not yet know that it happened on social media, so there's some value added there, but people will probably rightly debate whether or not the benefit of that study was worth the risk. Now, another and related question is, are those risks distributed evenly? So if we are only going to ask a very vulnerable population to be part of a study, and then for that vulnerable population, there's some people who are even more vulnerable to the type of intervention that we might want to do, then we need to really carefully consider whether these risks, that all research has risks, whether these risks are evenly distributed across large groups of people. Finally, we just need to think about the bigger picture. Is it legal and in the public interest? Now, the Facebook emotional contagion study, by the letter of the law, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is it was legal because it was within the terms of service, effectively the contract that the Facebook users signed with the company. But was it in the public interest? And did it serve some social good? We could argue about the merits of the scientific contribution, right? But we could also argue that there was a real negative, which is to say that the way this controversy unfolded meant not that Facebook and many other companies stopped doing experiments, but only that they were removed from public view. And in the end, that's a real negative for everyone, right? Science lost because we don't get to see the results of the studies as often. Facebook lost because it lost the opportunity to kind of maintain a kind of positive connection to science and to recruit people into Facebook from science. And ultimately, we're left with a much less transparent, open, and carefully reviewed system of research than we might have had things gone differently.